Hi, I'm Dean Bushmiller with Expanding Security, and this is Knowledge of Cybersecurity Policies and Procedures K0677. Let's get started. From a conceptual standpoint, I really need to pause here and talk about terms because there's a lot of confusion on directive controls in the real world. Now, these are all directive administrative controls. This is the paperwork of the organization. And I know a lot of you out there hate documentation, but this is really what makes the business world go round. First definition for you is policy. And that's the mandatory high-level statements of goals, behaviors, and consequences. It's a plan or a course of action, and it's used to influence the decisions and actions. They are general instructions and state what needs to be done. The standard policy that we talk about that management has sign off on says something very vague that will make sure that we can't be sued for saying it legally. It'll say something like, our organization believes in the highest confidentiality, integrity, and availability for all of our stakeholders, both internal and external, making sure that we comply with all the legal requirements in the jurisdictions that we operate on. And then the CSO signs off on it. And that policy, even though it feels like, oh God, I really don't want to do this thing, or this really is worthless, why do we go ahead and do this, is because it gives all of the other tools that we're going to talk about their authority. So functional policies is usually where we as information security people live. And those functional policies rely on that policy up above to get their authority. Those functional policies are very specific actions, responsibilities, or acceptable behaviors related to the operation of a system or a process. A functional policy would be something like acceptable use, work from home, or VPN policy. It could be very, very technical in nature. Now, that relies on things like standards. And this is a required rules or procedures used to implement the control objectives defined in a policy. In other words, we're going to match this policy with some sort of controls, and the standard is going to say this is what we need to do. It's much more specific than the policies or functional policies, and it's going to outline technical requirements. The classic example of this is if you go into an Ethernet network and you were to look at the wiring standard on how the pinouts of the 8 wires that are sitting in there are set with the twisted pairs and those kinds of things. I believe that's the EIA TIA 543 standard, and you can either do it A or B. Now, I've worked with a lot of wiring people out there in the world, and the first thing that they do when they walk in the door, if there's an existing plant in place, is they go up and they test for A versus B. Your organization may be set up as A, that organization may set up as B, and you can't, well, if you cross the two, you get a crossover cable. And so that's the first thing that they actually test for. And if you ever go into any kind of wire rack or wire management for Ethernet, look on the back of the racks and you'll see that they've written up their EIA TIA 543A or 543B. But no matter what, they always go in and test for that standard. We use that external standard as an adopted standard internally so that we can go ahead and run a particular way. Best practices. Now, this is a summary of what everyone in the industry would do if they could do it perfectly. They say, for all the configuration and control standards, if we had the most optimized firewall in the entire world, it would have all of these rules. But we can't implement all of those rules because your organization is different from their organization. And so we say, okay, well, we can follow these things, we can follow those things, but because of our organization, we take of the best practices, the ones that will work based on our business case, based upon our mission. Now, this is going to inform the development of standards and procedures for our organization. Speaking of which, with procedures, if you forget everything else, they're step by step. Their goal is to achieve we're going to achieve a specific goal and describe exactly how a task is to be carried out. Now, it's going to reference the underlying policies, guidelines, and standards. That procedure will be really, really specific to our organization. For example, let's say that we were to remove a network card. Well, the first thing that we would do is power down the operations. The second thing that we would do is put on a wrist strap. A static strap. And so that procedure says this is what you should be doing to remove this network card. And so we're going to follow that so that we don't destroy the throughput for our network cards. Last one in this list of definitions is baselines. And that's describing a technology with an expiration in mind. Usually you talk about end of service, end of life, baselines, and we're not talking about configuration baselines here. We're talking about baselines for deploying operations. Like we will make sure that we update our antivirus on a daily basis, at least once every 24 hours, something like that. We've got 23 and a half hours to do it, but we still have to do it and it has an expiration in mind. You must do it by this date. Okay, let's set a little context here with all of those things. Let's kind of put them together in what we're going to try and do here. Remember, policy is management's assertions of the required actions. You will do this. That's the due care. The control is the technical enforcement of that policy. That's the due diligence. That's the firewall that does what we said it does, and the people follow those firewalls because they're forced into by that control. Now, we bring this all together under an audit, and an audit is a verification of the controls enforcing the policy. Now, I'd like to not live in an audit world. I'd like to live in a security world, but the reality is that regulations come and are imposed upon us all the time, and therefore what we have to do is we have to adhere to those regulations. We have to prove that we are adhering to those regulations. We have to be seen as adhering to those regulations. We need to go ahead and say we're doing this, do it, and then have metadata to go ahead and prove that we've been doing it while you weren't there. Now, let's think about the why and the when of paperwork, because this is directive. When does this stuff happen? Do we just come in the first day and, oh, it's a green field, let's go ahead and put it in all the policies? No, that's not what happens. We start off with ad hoc requirements, like on startup of the organization. We have to have a policy for this, like a non-disclosure policy because it's a super secret organization. It could be issue specific, but usually it's generally as needed. Oh, we're going to go ahead and send everybody home this weekend. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a BYOD policy with a work from home policy and how you log your hours and those kinds of things. The next is some significant change happens in the organization. And usually it's that moment, right? It's that thing, okay? Like a litigation event occurs. Now, I've seen this happen in organizations where they had no acceptable use policy whatsoever, and then all of a sudden, somebody got offended, somebody got sued, and so therefore they say, okay, well, now we've got to protect ourselves against this. And you'll see this happening all the time with all sorts of different policies that are out there. The one that I see most common for everybody out there is on the end of the extension cord that you have, there's this big, huge white tag, and it has all these warnings on it of all these things that you shouldn't do because somebody somewhere chewed on the end of an extension cord and it was not supposed to be placed into their mouth. And so therefore an attorney had to write a policy that says, do not insert the other end of the plug into your mouth or chew on the cord. It's dangerous if you wrap this around your neck and swing from it. It's like, really? Do I have to do that? Yeah, because we got sued once, so that gets put in place. Stop suing, that will go away. Okay, but after litigation is usually the time. Management comes along and says, hey, we want to go ahead and do something. We want to go ahead and be bigger and better. I would love it to happen that way. It doesn't normally. The mission changes. Regulatory statutes change. A merger or an acquisition actually occurs. Now, the last time that this actually happens and why we need to update the paperwork is because there's a life cycle in it. We've put it in place and now we have to commit to updating it on a regular basis. When we look at this paperwork and we consider human resources, there's going to be a lot of paperwork that happens to us when we're doing onboarding, our indoctrination process, and generally it's that big binder that thuds on your desk and they say, okay, read all of this stuff. Oh, well, I don't have time to read all this stuff. Okay, flip to the back, and you see there it says that you are responsible for these policies, but I haven't read these policies yet. You're responsible for all these policies, and you can't start getting paid until you've read this entire manual and signed off on it. Now, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee, and that person walks out of the room, and you go, well, I don't want to get paid. So you sign it, and you tear it off, and you hand it in. I'll read the stuff when I go ahead and get a chance for it. Now, we shouldn't be doing that, but that's what happens. I've only seen in one case where there was an organization that had a training prior to the organization getting up and running, where they actually went through every single policy and tested you on every single policy. Now, I'm sure that there's others out there, but most of them, they give you a little bit of training here, a little bit of training there, and then stick you with your roles and responsibilities and focus in on that energy, and they don't look at all the policies there. When we want a quality policy organization, remember that the level of rigor of the definitions that you create will get you the level of quality that you put in. So garbage in, garbage out. What we get from this generally is the knowledge in our organization, and that only happens because we're doing continual awareness. I hope you'll join me for the rest of the presentation.